Alright, so this is the automatic malware sandbox presentation for GIT335 Spring 2018 by Mark. So first of all, it's important to tell you where we're headed with this presentation. It's important to know that we're going to discuss the what of automatic malware sandboxes, the how, the why, and the when, and the who, followed with a presentation or demonstration with Cuckoo Sandbox. So what is malware? Well, ICOC in 2006 said software whose intent is malicious or whose effect is malicious. This could be anything, to be honest, and so when we think about the breakdown of the words automated malware sandbox, we're dealing with malware basically inside a virtualized environment. And we're going to get to that in the next slide. What is a sandbox? So virtualization is, as it says, partitioning of computing resources inside a mainframe. Really what this equates to is either software or a way to just basically collect resources like memory and storage and allocate that to something where you have an emulation of some operating system or a real computer basically running in software. And then really keep in mind that we want this sandbox, this automated malware sandbox, to be controlled environment where we can revert and process different tools inside the environment. So, and then keep in mind that it's going to be isolated. Granted that sometimes we allow the network to be able to talk out to the internet, usually with a VPN. So, but in general, the core emulation of malware inside this virtualization is basically isolated from any of the resources of the host, which would be your laptop or server or any other tool that you've been using to run the virtualization tool in this. We'll get into that a little more. I thought this visual here was kind of a good way to look at it. The outside grass in here would be your host, and then the outside boxes of the sandboxes, your actual virtualization, and then all the sand is kind of the resources allocated from the actual sand from the ground. And so you have all the tools inside there for malware analysis. So let's go to the next slide where we discuss about what are the options of malware sandboxes, automated malware sandboxes. So this would be the screen of Joe. Oh, I forgot to take out the pointer. But anyways, this is the, not Joe Sandbox. Yeah, it is. Sorry. But anyways, so this is Joe's Sandbox. And so I believe in 2010 or so, the first hybrid sandbox was created in this. And don't get wrapped up about the words, but we'll cover them. But it covers dynamic and static analysis. CW Sandbox importance is in, I believe, 2009 or 2010, maybe 2009, I believe. It was the first actual automated malware sandbox. And then we have Cuckoo Sandbox, which was started as a open Google project in 2012 and is the one of the most prominent open source environment and one of the most suggested environments to be used for most security professionals currently. So let's just recap. We discussed what malware was. We discussed what sandbox was, which is virtualization. Obviously, malware is anything malicious. Options, we just discussed the CW sandbox, the Joe sandbox, which is a hybrid sandbox. And then we have the Cuckoo sandbox, which is an open source environment tool for automated malware analysis, sandboxes. So how does the malware sandbox works? Well, remember the definition of virtualization of partitioning computing resources. You have all the tools to do behavioral analysis inside that VM or virtual machine. And then you have the option of hypervisors, bare metal, or hardware. Now, hypervisors would be the just the software that emulates your actual environment. So keeping that in mind, we have bare metal, which would allow the computing resources of virtualization to interact with the actual hardware, still isolated to a large degree, and then you have running just malware straight on the hardware, where you would probably clone the hard drive or just do a revert of the whole system with the operating system. Rarely do you see that used often enough, but anyways, going along. So how does malware analysis work? Because obviously we're doing automation of malware sandboxes where you're basically doing dynamic and static analysis. Dynamic would be behavioral research on the malware. Static is really looking at the hashes and looking at just the behavioral stuff that you wouldn't run or detonate the malware. And then the methodology, basically the idea, just kind of to describe the next two pictures, is basically the overview of how it works, and then on top of that you move to the next stage of actually how it gets run inside the automated malware sandbox. You obtain the malware, obviously, and then you go through this process of static analysis and dynamic, and it's iterative, so you have to keep doing it until you refine what malware you're dealing with, the behaviors, the indicators of compromise, which we'll discuss a little bit further, and then the reporting. And this is something that's glued into the actual process of automated malware sandboxes. There's really not much history to this idea because it's kind of current. It's been around probably a good 5 to 7 years now, and so history's not as interesting as the process by which they do this. And then we have the automated process, which is you create a baseline, which is not necessarily always what you have to do, but you have that on hand. So you kind of look at it, you see reverting images, you see the transfer of the malware, or the pre-execution of tasks, which would be all the tools that you'd be doing behavioral analysis, or static, or anything dynamic. Then you detonate the malware, that's just basically executing the malware. You do post-execution, which is probably creating the tasks of like reports and stuff. You'll see that in Cuckoo Sandbox in the demonstration. And then you suspend the VM and dump the memory and then start all over again. So basically this is the automated process that you're going to see. It still follows the same idea. When you see the pre and the post execution, you're seeing the iterative process of static and dynamic malware analysis. And then obviously we discussed how they work. We have sandboxes, they're isolated, they're detonating malware. You have tools that do dynamic malware analysis and some static, depending on the hybrid environment of a automated malware sandbox. That was where you'll see both of them. Generally, it's just basic dynamic malware analysis where you're just detonating the malware and looking at the behavior. Then why and when would you use this? Well, incident response, or IR. This is to really identify malware quickly so that you can mitigate the issues on the network or host. Depending on the team, you're looking at IOCs again, indicators of compromise, which will allow you to push out the quick response on what tools to really clean up malware when you can identify what it is. Then we just have the speed up process again assisting in the reporting. We'll just recap again. It's really just speeding up the process of how to do malware analysis. So we also have automated malware analysis. Who needs it? We have digital forensics investigators, we have incident handlers, and malware analysts. Really, this is a recap of the previous section, but it's important to realize that you want to double check your research. This is basically what an automated malware analysis sandbox would be for a digital forensics investigator. The picture here kind of shows you that there's just a lot of overlap in the research and the tools that would be necessary for each group that we're discussing, which is digital forensics investigators, IR people, and then malware analysts. And then for the incident response, obviously we want to create a baseline, investigate malware more quickly. It's a tool for IR people. So moving along, we have the malware analysts. So really what the malware analysts need is an accurate and safe way to really study the behavior of malware. You obviously don't want it on hardware, and so having a virtualization tool like VMware or VirtualBox is really helpful for them. Recap again, we just kind of covered that again, the principles of why and when and how and who. Speeding up malware analysis is a priority just because you don't have time to do all the manual labor of that work. And then also, we just want to cover over kind of wrapping thoughts. There's a demand for this just because you have such a volume of malware. The growth of technology, so being able to emulate a lot of the technologies that would be infected is a priority, and then just the human nature of people. Right, you just get a lot of crime with malware with different variants. The actual variants themselves don't change, but the needs of those sandboxes, automated sandboxes with malware analysis is a priority, and so that's why you have so many variations of hybrid and bare metal, and then hypervisors, which is Cuckoo Sandbox and stuff. So we'll move on to the presentation, demonstration of the Cuckoo Sandbox, and then here's just the references. Thanks for going through the slides with me.